So it's now my huge pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Kathy Hudson. We were both in the East Room of the White House when President Obama announced the BRAIN Initiative last April. And how many of you have actually watched that clip? Ah, that is wonderful. And for those of you who haven't, if you wanted to go and watch it, it is unbelievably inspirational. You can get to it from the main NIH website or the White House website.
Is that the Charlie Rose one?
No, there's a Charlie Rose one in it. No. The Charlie Rose one was fun. I don't know if I would call it inspirational. Well, maybe it was. Once you're in the thick of it, it's hard to know if it's inspirational or not. No, this is first is Dr. Francis Collins, the director of NIH, introduced President Obama and designated him as the scientist in chief. That was cool. And then President Obama spoke for about 20 minutes about the BRAIN Initiative, creativity and innovation in this country, and the need to support research and innovation and national competitiveness. So it's actually the easiest way I know to get to it is if you go to the main NIH website, you'll see a piece about NIH BRAIN. If you open that up, it will get you to the link for the White House thing. Kathy Hudson is now the Deputy Director for Science, Outreach, and Policy at NIH. She describes that as all the fun things. Previously, she served as the Acting Deputy Director for NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, and she really played a key role in setting that new center up. The NIH Chief of Staff, the Assistant Director of the National Human Genome Research Institute, and Director of the Genetics and Public Policy Center, which she founded at Johns Hopkins. So, Kathy, it's all yours. Thank you so much for coming.
So thanks for the invitation. It's really inspirational to see all of you here interacting with NINDS and providing your input and thoughts and how they do their work. I wish we had a Friends of the Office of the Director, which we really don't have, but we need. It was, in fact, inspirational to be in the White House along with Story and many others in early April when the president unveiled this new challenge, the BRAIN Initiative. There was a photograph maybe a week or so ago on the front page of the financial section of the New York Times that was taken at that White House event. And it was Francis standing next to the president. And what's interesting is that Francis is taller than the president, which you can see from that picture. My son, who pays very little, 19-year-old son, who pays very little attention to what I'm doing, only notices what I'm doing when it ends up in the newspaper. And so he texted me and said, "Francis is on the cover of the financial pages." So I do this, I think. So Francis did stand with the president to announce what the president referred to as the next great American project, the BRAIN Initiative, brain research through advancing innovative neurotechnologies. Another thing to watch, if you're going to watch interesting and fun things about the BRAIN Initiative, is the Colbert Report. Francis was a guest on the Colbert Report, and Stephen pointed out that we shouldn't have a B in the BRAIN Initiative stand for brain, but it was the best we could do. So as you all know extremely well, and which I am frankly having an extraordinary opportunity to learn about neuroscience and the devastating effect of neurodegenerative and traumatic brain injuries as a part of my work with the working group, which is basically to help ensure the success of this initiative in its early days at the NIH. And these, of course, are disorders that I'm sure are represented here in the room and which have touched all of our lives. The science, in large part because of the investments at NIH and certainly NINDS, has brought us to a place where we are in a unique moment in the history of science and technology in order to apply what we have learned to develop new tools and technologies to understanding brain structure and function. And certainly the technological advances in neuroscience are just dizzying and have been extraordinary for me to to learn about as a part of my peripheral role in the BRAIN initiative as it's getting launched. So there are opportunities to understand brain structure, not just in model organisms, but also in human beings. This is a picture of a mouse hippocampus with cells labeled with colors where you can actually distinguish more than 90, I think, different colors now with Brainbow, and therefore can track where those individual cells are going and who they're touching and interacting with. There's also the development of a new technology to basically make brains see-through so that you can then label things and wash it out and label it again and wash it out so that you can look at gene expression or protein expression or distribution of various chemicals in the brain. The gentleman who developed this technique, Carl Deseroth, who I am confident is going to win at least one Nobel Prize, is on our brain working group, which I'll mention in just a second. And then the human connectome, which I hope you guys have heard about here in this room before, which Story has been a real leader on, doing imaging of human brains in order to map the connections between different regions of the brain and different circuits. Let me see if this works. So this is a larval zebrafish. And what we're able to do now is measure the activity of many, many neurons at once firing. What we don't know is what any of this means, or at least I don't think we yet know what this means. And you can see little explosions going off in this guy's brain, wondering what he's thinking about. There's also the ability to measure activity from freely behaving mammals. So this is a mouse who has a little endoscope in his head, and the picture on the right there is the activity. Oh, yeah, he's sort of hard to see. He's too little. He looks like a roach. And then on the right, are measurements of what's going on in his brain as he's moving around. And then lastly, these are pictures from human brains, and I don't think this video works, it hasn't recently, where we're able to look at activity in different regions of the brain in awake thinking human beings. So despite the fact that we have all of these techniques to measure the activity of individual neurons, and we have the activity to image what's going on in an entire human brain through fMRI and other techniques, we really have only the mistiest understanding of how we perceive, remember, think, process, plan, and everything else that makes our brains so special. And we really need that understanding in order to have a comprehensive understanding of what goes on when that process becomes injured, diseased, or disordered. So we really need to understand how the different parts of the brain work together to generate activity, and how those patterns of activity, those circuits, are translated into thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. So on April 2nd, the president said that there's an enormous mystery waiting to be unlocked, and the BRAIN Initiative will change that by giving scientists the tools they need to get a dynamic picture of the brain in action. Better understanding of how we think and how we learn and how we remember, and that knowledge could be and will be transformative. And there was an emphasis in his remarks on the tools that are needed in order to really advance our understanding of the brain. So the BRAIN Initiative goals are to accelerate the development and application of innovative technologies, as is embedded in its name, in order to construct a dynamic picture of the brain function that integrates neuronal and circuit activity over time and space. And also to build on what we have already learned from many areas, from physics to informatics to computing, in order to catalyze interdisciplinary work. And that's really been sort of a recurrent theme in the discussions, is that we need to be able to have many, many, many brains from different disciplines working together in order to solve these problems. The initial partners that were announced on April 2nd in the White House included 3 federal partners: NIH, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, who is really fun to work with and we've had great partnerships with already. the National Science Foundation, who of course has a long history in working with us as well. And each of those three agencies unveiled, or the president unveiled, that we would be making these investments in FY14, which of course starts in a couple of weeks. So not a lot of time to spare here. And then 4 private organizations were named at that time, most notably the Allen Institute for Brain Science, which has a tremendous enterprise and a tremendous investment in understanding neuroscience, and also the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and their sort of intramural program in Genelia Farms, not far from here. So one of the things I wanted to mention at this point is that these were the partners who were cobbled together, frankly, in a hurry, just in advance of the president's announcement. Are these all the right partners? Certainly not. So I have been working with Francis and with folks in the White House about how to restructure this, because I don't think that this is exactly the right structure. So even within government agencies, we are clearly missing critical partners. So I spent a lot of time yesterday talking to the Food and Drug Administration about their participation in this project. Francis is meeting with the Secretary of Energy to talk to him about how they can contribute to this project. The Veterans Administration certainly should be involved in this project as well. And so just even on the government side, I think we have some expansion and inclusiveness that we need to undertake. The private philanthropic organizations are kind of one category of partners. We have been approached, all of us have been approached by companies who are interested in bringing what they have to offer to the table, companies from device companies, pharmaceutical companies, and IT companies, so Google, Intel, Microsoft, IBM, all of these companies that have incredible computation power and resources that they could bring to bear. And importantly, a partner who is not on this original founding list are patients and the organizations that represent patients. And so I think that we need to wrap that into a sort of a revised set of partners as we move forward and actually launch in FY14 in a couple of weeks. And I haven't even talked to Story about this. What do you think, Story? So, and then trying to coordinate all those people will be really fun. We keep on getting offers from various people who would like to coordinate us, which might not be a bad idea. So on our end, Francis put together an advisory group or a working group to his advisory council of really smart folks to help us shape how will we use these investments in FY14. And then what's the big plan? Is it a decade long? Is it 15 years long? And then what will be the milestones along the way? And of course, in his head, having been the leader of the Human Genome Project, he thinks about it in terms of those kinds of very detailed plans that were concrete. You know what you're shooting for. You know when you've gotten there. You know when you can declare success. You know when you need to rethink. And so he put this group together. They were named actually on April 2nd when we launched the BRAIN initiative, and they have been working extremely hard. This is a list of who that group is. Some of these names may be familiar to you. Carl Desarath, I mentioned a few moments ago with Clarity. This group ranges from people who study very simple invertebrate organisms to Bill Newsom, who is one of the co-chairs who studies non-human primates. So a whole breadth of expertise and experience here, and a group of people who have been incredibly dedicated and have invested a big chunk of their summer to this undertaking. So they were charged with seeking broad input, holding open meetings and workshops, and delivering an interim report of high priority areas for funding in FY14, and they're going to do that on Monday. So they had a very limited period of time in order to basically survey the entire landscape in brain-related science, identify which are the top priorities that could be moved forward usefully in FY14, but keeping in mind that they have next summer to deliver to us the full enchilada, the whole plan of what the BRAIN initiative for NIH is going to entail. And then we're going to have to figure out how to map that into a total tapestry with our other partners. And again, they have they have worked really, really hard, have had a series of meetings and workshops. So started small and got bigger and more complex, starting looking at molecular approaches to understanding neuroscience, and then through these different topics. The last meeting was a little over a week ago in Minneapolis, where the focus was really on the human. And of course, that's sort of helped integrate everything that had come before. They have been meeting regularly, had a long conference call on Sunday, and Corey Bargman and Bill Newsom will present their recommendations. They're not really recommendations. They're high priority areas for FY14 to the advisory committee of the director on Monday in a public teleconference from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And so please join in. I think that the brain part will be the first hour or so of that, and we can send around or share with you guys the call-in number for that, and you'll be able to see the presentation and listen to the discussion, and there'll be a brief public comment period. So features of the BRAIN initiative, at least I think particularly early on, will be to providing tools that will enhance many, many, many areas of research. The BRAIN initiative itself is disease agnostic, although the expectation is that it will be applicable to studies on all diseases. When the president announced the BRAIN initiative, he intimated, and then maybe a month or so later, specifically directed his commission for the study of bioethical issues to look at neuroscience and the BRAIN initiative, and he asked them to identify core ethical standards, both to guide neuroscience research, but to also address the ethical dilemmas raised by the applications of neuroscience research. He further asked them to be very inclusive and engage a wide range of constituencies. And their first meeting was pretty recently, and Walter Koroshetz, who's sitting in the audience, represented NIH at that first inaugural meeting where they were sort of scoping out what the territory was in neuroethics and brain ethics. So I think some of the ethics and policy issues that we're going to be talking about over the course of the BRAIN initiative are ones that we have talked about not just in neuroscience, but in all of science for decades, and they continue to pose challenges and opportunities for us. Consent, of course, is an important issue. Consent with people who have difficulty, decisionally impaired individuals, of course, is a particularly challenging issue. We always have an opportunity to improve how we do this. Providing people with extra long, extra complex forms is not really the answer. We have been, at NIH, been focusing a lot of our attention on research consent, and then you may know that the Department of Health and Human Services in the White House about 2 years ago put out a proposal to revise the regulations that govern the protection of research participants in research. We are working to refine that and get another proposal out the door. And so this comes up, of course, in all areas of clinical research and human subjects research, but I think probably in many ways more challenging in neuroscience. Clinical trials, Petra was talking about clinical trials. Francis Collins put together a working group on clinical trials that has delivered, that Petra served on, that has delivered recommendations to him about how to improve clinical trials and reform clinical trials, and he's going to be rolling out some initiatives over the course of this fall. We'll have to work really closely with all communities, but BRAIN will certainly be involved. Issues that I think come up probably more frequently in neuroscience and in genetics is this whole issue of human enhancement and control and mind control. And there have been some recent news stories that sort of have re-raised some of those issues, and so they need to be thoughtfully considered. And of course, privacy is a perennial issue, but I think even more profound perhaps in neuroscience, even when you think about what can you learn about somebody from imaging, what can you learn about reconstructions of images that might be shared broadly. And here, I think some of our priorities about data sharing and our values about data sharing and our values about privacy sort of come into an interesting intersection. So these will be, first and foremost, not just for the President's Commission who's looking at this, but I think also for NIH. We in the Office of the Director have a little pot of money for ethics and policy issues, and Dr. Collins has decided to devote that to collecting evidence that will be immediately relevant to the science we do and the policies that we promote. And so we are looking not this year, but in FY14 of potentially devoting some of those dollars to exploring some of these issues in neuroethics. And I think that's all, and thank you very much for your attention. I do.
So, questions for Dr. Hudson? Way in the back on the left, I think. This is being webcast, Kathy. I don't think I let you know.
Uh-oh.
So everybody has to have a microphone before they're permitted to ask the question.
Hi, my name is Jim Blackman from the Cerebral Palsy International Research Foundation. You quoted the president as referring to this as, I think, a new American project. You obviously know there are great things going on elsewhere in the world. How is this going to interface with potential collaborators elsewhere on Earth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. There are projects going on in Europe and Japan and various things that are starting to spring up. So this is not we're not alone in focusing attention and priority on the brain. And so I think even above that national set of partners that I was talking about and the coordination we need to do with them, there also needs to be a global effort. There are foundations and government efforts around the world that need to be at a minimum closely communicating and then optimally really coordinating. So the European effort is really focused around modeling and computing, and so how can we sort of make sure that our efforts synergize with theirs? We have been starting that information exchange, and Story, maybe you can weigh in, but we haven't had the sort of the convening of the global brain effort yet. And I think from my perspective, it's a little early because we're just starting to get the glimmer of what our investments are going to look like. And so we would sort of be like, we're jazzed, but we don't know where we're going. So now that we have our recommendations in hand, I think we'll be in a better place. Do you want to?
I think that to the extent that I've been able to listen to the discussions of the priorities of the NIH BRAIN team, and have heard descriptions and read descriptions of the European project, they are very different. The kinds of data that we hope will be collected with the new tools that are going to be created will certainly feed into what the European BRAIN project will be doing, but they are less interested in how real brains work than in taking what's known about how brains work and creating computer-based systems that mimic that. China is thinking about a major project, and we all know that if China invests in a major project, there will be buckets and buckets of money, something we need to think about in terms of our budget. Not clear exactly what their project will be, but huge groundswell of enthusiasm for brain science at this time in our history.
Very simple question. When you say brain, does that include the spinal cord?
Yes. Excellent. Thank you. Is there somebody right here?
I hear a lot about, you're talking about technology and the neurosciences, but what about preventative? What does the BRAIN Initiative have to do with like prevention? For example, cytomegalovirus is one of the real known causes, and yet we are not routinely testing, and some of our European counterparts are testing and treating the fetus in utero with hyperimmunoglobulin, and we're not doing that. And so, and also we're destroying our heel stick blood spot cards for a lot of our genetics. So I'm wondering how the BRAIN Initiative is going to handle this infectious disease and genetics standpoint? Is that going to be addressed with the initiative?
So I think that there'll be insights from the BRAIN initiative that would certainly have a bearing, but that will not be a central focus. And one thing I didn't say, and I should have said, is that the BRAIN initiative, certainly in fiscal year 14, is a microscopic portion of NIH's overall investments in neuroscience. And so we need to keep in mind that this is a small fraction that's very focused on a specific set of goals and deliverables, and hopefully those outputs will benefit more broadly neuroscience. But we are not, the BRAIN initiative is not trying to address all things in neuroscience. And so that would be probably outside of our scope within the BRAIN initiative.
I mean, if you remember that first slide that I showed, 5.5 billion in FY12 for neuroscience, and I know that those issues that you raised have certainly been funded for, research on those have been funded through that other pot of money. This is a separate, much more focused, and so concerns about those kinds of issues need to get addressed to NINDS and NIAID and taken up outside the current initial start of this project.
Yeah. There's one right in the middle.
Jennifer Sheridan with the Parkinson's Action Network. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about coordination. It's great that you're thinking about adding FDA and other agencies. I think that's wonderful. But can you talk a little bit more about how you're coordinating NIH's efforts with DARPA and with NSF? Because I feel like those two haven't heard as much about, but I feel like NIH is really kind of going with their ball. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about how they're coordinating.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one way in which we're coordinating is that we have ex officio members on our working group from both DARPA and from NSF. And so they have been actively participating in those discussions. We have brought together the leadership of the National Science Foundation and DARPA and NIH actually repeatedly to talk about what's going on with the BRAIN initiative. We are cooking up really fun collaborations with both of those agencies that would fall under the BRAIN initiative as we move forward. And I would just like to see additional partners being brought in because we can do sort of unique things with our constituencies of the folks that we work with and with the kinds of funding mechanisms we have. So DARPA has a very different focus and agility that we can draft after. So those things are going on. And then Francis is planning to bring together all of the partners and maybe this new set of partners too, soon after the receipt of and recommendations from the advisory committee on our part of the plan. So that's a work in progress.
Kathy, could you go back to the slide where the dollars were, the 40? Yeah. So could you, the private organizations, the Allen, HHMI, Salk, and the Calvi, is that money that they themselves are putting up for the initiative, or is that federal dollars that have been given to them?
So that is money that they are contributing that falls under this umbrella of the BRAIN initiative. And folks, especially from Allen and HHMI, from Genelia, have been participating in the work of the working group on specific areas. And they have areas which they have worked in and which they plan on working in, where I think there's going to be a lot of synergy between what we're supporting with our dollars and what they're supporting within their own research institutes. So both Allen and Genelia are sort of research campuses focused on brain science. And so they're making substantial investments here already. And I think fine-tuning what their future investments are based on the interactions and sort of community learning that we're undertaking together. And we are staying in very close contact. So Jerry Rubin, who runs Genelia Farms, was on my thesis committee when I was in graduate school, and we talk all the time and are coordinating. And then the lead folks from the Allen Institute as well, we're in weekly, if not daily, contact with them.
So last question, it's not really a question, but an offer of help. So you have in front of you chief science officers, CEOs of many of the private foundations. What can we do to help you guys push the BRAIN initiative? Is it letters to our congressmen, to our lobbying groups, to the folks who will actually make sure that this goes forward in the near future and hopefully for the next half a decade at least? What can we do to help you?
So I really appreciate that question. And of course, right now we're in a particularly perilous circumstance where we're at the end of the fiscal year. There's not a budget in place for next year. The Congress is contemplating passing a continuing resolution. A continuing resolution, a true continuing resolution, which would be what we have right now post-sequester. Next year would have an additional cut of, I think, about 2% or $600 million below where we are after the sequester this year. And so this is a nervous time. What I think that the BRAIN initiative does is it draws attention to the potential of biomedical research in a very focused and directed way. And so by every voice saying this is an important thing to support and biomedical research is important for us to continue to invest in, both for the health of the nation but also for the economy. I think that's a message that can't be repeated too many times. It's so important, and we're so grateful that there are voices such as yours who are delivering that message.
I will make that the last question. Thank you very much, Kathy, for your willingness to come and share this with our group. Oh, and there is an NIH website where you can provide comments. It's under the BRAIN tab. Go to the main NIH website page. BRAIN is on the right-hand side, and there's a website where you can, a blog where you can put in comments, and we would be grateful for those comments. We assume that once the plan is announced that there will be a lot of comments that will appear on that, and be nice to have yours as well.